Most of us have heard the opening of Genesis so many times that we don't even stop to question it. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void. But underneath the English phrase, without form and void, are two Hebrew words, Tohu, Va-Vohu, usually translated formless and void, waste and emptiness, desolate and empty. But what exactly does that mean? Was Genesis describing an earth that hadn't been finished yet? Or could it have been describing an earth that had become desolate? Because Tohu Va-Vohu appears somewhere else in the Bible, and that passage gives us something interesting to think about. In Hebrews 4:22, in Jeremiah 4:22, the prophet has a vision. I beheld the earth, and lo, it was without form and void. There it is again, the exact same Hebrew expression, Tohu Va-Vohu. But Jeremiah keeps looking. He looks towards the heavens. There is no light. He sees the mountains trembling. He looks again. There are no humans. The birds have fled. The fruitful land has become wilderness. And then Jeremiah sees something that changes the way we might hear those words. Cities. Jeremiah 4:26 says, all the cities were broken down. Think about that. Jeremiah sees an earth that is Tohu Va-Vohu. But this isn't an earth that has never been inhabited. There are ruined cities. There had been people. There had been birds. There had been fruitful lands. Something that had been past. Order in life had become desolate. Jeremiah is describing judgment upon the land, using the imagery of creation running backwards. Creation had become decreation. So Tohu Va-Vohu doesn't necessarily mean nothing has been created yet. It can describe something that has become desolate, empty, uninhabitable. And that brings us back to Genesis. Now go back and look carefully at Genesis 1 through 2. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void. But the Hebrew says, Vaha Eretes, Heta Tohu Va-Vohu. The word translated is Heatek. Heata, from the Hebrew verb heya, to be, to become, to come to pass. And heya absolutely can describe something becoming something. So there is another way to hear the sequence. And the earth became Tohu Va-Vohu. Now stop there because that changes the question. If the earth was Tohu Va-Vohu, we naturally imagine an unfinished world waiting to be ordered. But if the earth became Tohu Va-Vohu, then we're looking at something different. A created earth that became desolate. Does Genesis tell us what happened? No. So let's not fill the silence with a story the text doesn't give us. But neither should we pretend that the question isn't there, because Jeremiah gives us an example of exactly what kind of imagery, of exactly this kind of imagery. He sees an inhabited world devastated. Humans are gone. Birds have fled. fruitful land has become wilderness. Cities are in ruins. And what does Jeremiah call the condition of that earth? Tohu Va-Vohu. Something inhabited had become desolate. Then Isaiah 45:18 adds another piece. God created the earth, not Tohu, and Isaiah tells us why God formed it, to be inhabited. Put those passages beside one another. Genesis 1:1, God creates the heaven and the earth. Genesis 1:2, the earth, Heate Tohu Va-Vohu, traditionally was, possibly became, desolate and empty. Jeremiah 4:23-26. An inhabited land is pictured as Tohu Va-Vohu after devastation. Isaiah 45:18, God says he did not create the earth Tohu, he formed it to be inhabited. Does that prove a civilization existed before Genesis 1:27? No. But does it give us reason to take seriously the possibility that Tohu Va-Vohu describes desolation rather than simply unfinished creation? I think it does. And then Genesis tells us what happens to that desolation. Darkness is over the deep, waters cover the earth, and the Ruach moves the water. And the Ruach moves. The waters separate. Dry land appears. Life returns to the landscape. And what does Tohu Va-Vohu become? Is inhabited. Maybe Genesis isn't only telling us how God creates, maybe it's also showing us what God does when creation has become chaos. Later, humanity reaches the story of Noah. The inhabited world disappears beneath the waters. Genesis 8:1 says that God causes a ruach to pass over the earth. The waters begin to reside. Dry land reappears. Animals emerge. Humans began to step onto the land, and the world is populated again. Its creation imagery repeated. Water, ruach, dry land, life. The Bible seems decidedly interested in this pattern. Jeremiah shows creation moving backwards. Habitation, destruction, Tohu Va-Vohu. Genesis shows the movement in the other direction. Tohu Va-Vohu, Ruach, order, habitation. Maybe that's the deeper lesson hidden inside these ancient Hebrew words. Tohu Va-Vohu doesn't have to be the end of the story. Your world can become chaotic. Things that once seemed permanent can collapse. What was fruitful can become wilderness. What was full can become empty. You can look around and barely recognize the world you once inhabited. Jeremiah did. But Genesis begins precisely there, in the darkness, in the deep, in the Tohu Va-Vohu. And what happens next? The Ruach moves. Maybe creation isn't only about making something that has never existed before. Sometimes creation is restorative. Sometimes creation begins with desolation. Sometimes the waters simply need to move so that what has been buried beneath them can appear again. So when your life feels Tohu Va-Vohu, formless, empty, desolate, don't assume you're looking at the end. You might be standing at the beginning, because when the world becomes Tohu Va-Vohu, the Ruach can move again.